Hello, friend. The mystical American Patriots Society is transmitting to you from beneath 4 million cubic feet of solid granite, in the burning heart of the Yellowstone caldera. This is a variety program for normal sandwich-eating Americans with some concerns about living in a deranged, post-Christian technocracy. So, keep your third eye on the sky and your ear to the ground, as Sumo and Smokestack connect your main brain vein to a higher plane. Are you ready? Stand by.
Sumo, do you have the coof yet?
No, my quarantine is going pretty well. I've been eating a lot of cloves of garlic, which is very painful.
Like raw? You eat them raw?
Yeah, just raw garlic.
It's based, dude.
I open up the clove, which is really difficult, actually. My experience with raw garlic was limited before this.
I got a big tip for you if you're going to be consuming a lot of garlic.
Yeah.
So take the whole clove, just sort of smush it between your hands on the two ends to loosen it up, to loosen all the cloves apart. Sorry, the whole head. Take the whole head of it. Then you put it between two mixing bowls and you just shake the crap out of it. And it will peel. It will peel all the garlic cloves.
Oh, that is very helpful because getting a single clove of garlic out of a garlic
head
bundle
called heads. Yeah,
head is very. I admit to all the listeners that my experience with root vegetables is limited.
Nobody's perfect.
And I did not realize how similar a garlic was to an onion. Mm-hmm. And to a turnip. They're like cousins, but the garlic is like the really, really pungent one of the family.
I don't think turnips and garlic are cousins. I just think they both grow underground.
Well, definitely it's close to an onion, right?
It is,
but
yes.
It sort of looks like a turnip.
It is turnip shaped.
Yeah.
But turnips don't have cloves and they don't make you stink for a week.
But it is the same shape.
It is, yeah. I guess by the doctrine of forms or whatever, they could be related.
Yeah, genetically, it has the same. Look, genetics is geometry.
Okay.
So that's my thesis.
All right.
But that was every day after, because sometimes in addition to my other works, I go to various hospitals and do medical works. I'm not a doctor of the medical variety, but I do have to go to hospitals. And so during this plague outbreak, which I still waffle back and forth on about how bad it will actually get for me personally in my area. I've been going into, and there's I don't know, it's like people here have the do people have the Wuhan miasma? I don't know. So I always, when I get back to the van, I just start chewing garlic.
That'll definitely work. Yeah.
And I think you have to chew it because someone gave me some capsules of garlic. Mm-hmm. And I was like, no, I think that it's actually the tremendous pungent plume of gas that burns all of your insides that kills the virus. Because you chew the raw garlic and it's just like this plume of sulfur or something. And it just goes up into your nostrils and I can even feel it in my ears.
Yeah.
And I feel like if there's any virus in my nasal passages or in my throat, it's being murdered by a gas attack.
I hope so.
Now, I don't know if this is science.
I don't think so.
This is giving me what would you call it? Placebo effect to keep me healthy.
Yeah. Well, there is something to the idea of introducing some very not pungent necessarily, but active chemicals into your mouth and throat that are gonna make your immune system react with a whole bunch of NK immune system cells and just kind of flood the zone. So there is something to that. That's one way that echinacea works, and So there's some. I haven't done a lot of research on garlic, but I've heard that it is pretty good for stuff like that.
Yeah, I need a plague doctor mask, like one of those big beak bird nose things, and just stuff it with garlic.
You should,
and then I'll be safe.
And like hyssop and stuff.
Hyssop. I don't have any hyssop. I do have some myrrh. I always keep some myrrh and some frankincense.
Good. Those probably work.
But I don't have any hyssop. Which I guess that's because I'm not Egyptian.
I'm growing some of my own medicinal herbs this year in the rapidly expanding smokestack family garden. So I'll send you some. It may be too late by then. They're just sprouts right now.
I have to go to these. Some people, their experience in the medical world will be almost everyone will be in city slicker hospitals.
Yep.
Right. A lot of my work is done in very rural county hospitals.
Okay.
In the middle of nowhere town.
So, do they give you a heads up if you go? Are you going to go in there? Are you going to know if there's
no? They don't tell you.
Oh wow.
They don't tell. In fact, what happened on maybe Thursday is I went to a place, and it's one of those. I don't go in the front door. That's a rule of mine in almost every situation. I don't go in the front door.
It's a good rule. Good rule.
Because that's where you get attacked.
Yeah.
So anyway, I always go in the side door, which involves, I never have a badge or anything in these lock things. So there's a lot of like finagling to get in a side door. But I always figure it out eventually. But anyway, people then accost you now. And they're like, hey, do you have a fever? And they just ask you questions. Do you have a fever? And it's like, no. Have you been in contact with the miasma? No, not to my knowledge. Et cetera, et cetera. I did go to one place where they wanted to take my temperature with an in-ear thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, great. Hell, I got to go back to the car. And then I just went around and didn't go that way. Because I'm not gonna get my temperature. Don't
touch me, bro.
If I have the miasma, then you have the miasma.
Right.
That's my policy. Because if I have the miasma,
super spreader
I stay home.
Sumo is on the loose and denying all temperature checks.
I'm a super spreader. Sumo super spreader. I was running around. I'm like terrorist typhoid Mary.
Yep.
Just giving it to everybody.
Yeah.
No, I did go into this one place, and he was like, "Hey, he asked me all these questions," and I said, "If you guys had any cases," and he's like, "We tested 4 people, but we don't know the results yet." And this was out in the middle of like not a big place, so I don't know. It's very strange, these plagues, because some places they hit real hard and other places just breeze by, and there's no rhyme or reason to it that I can discern.
Interesting.
Like Italy is obviously being hit real hard. And it looks like Switzerland. Switzerland hasn't been on many people's radar, but Switzerland is looking rough.
Yeah, I think Zermatt, right? Is getting whacked. Yeah.
But then like Germany is just like Gorfin, no problems there. They're just... they got cases, but it doesn't seem that bad.
Interesting.
And the UK is just wide open to the world still with travel, and nothing seems to be kicking off there. I don't understand why. Maybe there's like one actually bad strain that just attacks. Like if you get that one, it's real bad, but otherwise, it's fine. Who knows?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to know what's going on right now.
It's very confusing, but I'm looking forward to martial law. I always felt that I would thrive in that environment.
Yeah. Well, we're built for chaos.
Yeah, because this is I never have liked. Here's the thing about right-wing people lately, is they're all like, "Boo-hoo, my civilization," And it's like, but the civilization was so boring. It really was. It's like, and we just all Twitter man Nicolo Salo, who I think is a Bulgarian. He's some sort of dirty Eastern European.
Okay,
but I love him. But he said succinctly, the Protestant work ethic is a disease, and I was like, that's so true. It's like all the whole society is we just go around. It's like, we got to go to work and you get up and do. And it's like, this is so boring.
Well, all that is gonna change. Here, okay. Here's. I gotta modify your theory of Western Protestantism a little bit. We have the work ethic, and if given the choice, or if asked, we would say we just want to work and be left alone.
Right.
But once chaos is introduced, we transmogrify and immediately rise to the top because all that work ethic turns into an insane amount of creativity and resourcefulness.
Right. Which is good. I think that's true.
Perfect. And so we have this shape-shifting ability in times of chaos. That's
going to be good because the transmogrify is all about, we're going to talk about alchemy today. This is a perfect segue.
Sweet. I can't wait.
But I'm not ready to segue yet because I still want to talk about how, like if civilization is just, we all go to our weird jobs that don't need to happen clearly because we can all stay home and nothing goes bad. It was so good. I was driving around. I was like, why don't everybody stay home all the time? I was just breezing down the interstate like, woo, no traffic.
The traffic has been great. Yeah.
This is fantastic. All of you people are obviously unnecessary.
Yeah.
You know, driving around. Everything's fantastic. Mm-hmm. You know, but see, we were just, the Protestant work ethic it's been unfocused. Mm-hmm. We need to be focused on like building a space elevator or some grand project.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not just everyone go to work to go to work. Like we need to go to work to build something cool. Mm-hmm. That's my problem. So maybe this is an opportunity but yeah, in martial law, I hope that it'll be more like Latin America. Because, in Latin America, you're really more free than in regular America.
During martial law?
Yeah, because you can just bribe people. You can do your things and like, here's some.
It opens up the bribe market.
The bribe market is the most free state of affairs.
Totally unregulated bribe market.
I mean, look, a lot of there are some U.S. police officers that will take bribes.
Oh, no doubt.
But it's not an institutional thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Like in Latin America, that's part of their salary, basically.
Right.
Because they're underpaid and to get by, they have to take bribes. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping that if this whole thing sort of crashes the dollar a bit and your blue-collar guys are sort of having a hard time getting by, and, bored 20-somethings in fatigues wandering around Philadelphia being like, I really signed up to go, like, smash doors in Iraq, not just hang out by the CVS here in Philly.
That's a bummer.
And then there's like, and then you're like, hey, look, can I just break the law real quick? I'll give you $100. I'm hoping they'll be like, yeah, because that's how you get a real libertarian state.
Yeah. Is that, I guess that is what libertarian looks like.
Yeah. Just like, hey, I'm not going to do any violent crime. I just want to go trespass this one thing.
Right.
And here's my indulgence. Mm-hmm. And they're like, yeah, sure. And I'm hoping that would be the outcome. I'm hoping that 22-year-old guy from Arkansas is going to be more willing to take a bribe than my local police officer. Mm-hmm. So I hope that'll be good. Yeah. I hope that'll be good. But yeah, transmogrification. I've been thinking a lot about alchemy lately.
Yeah.
I'm reading a lot about alchemy. Because here's the alchemy. What do you think? All right. For you and our listeners, if I say the word alchemy, what do you think it's about? What's alchemy about?
I'm thinking pointy hat, right? Long white beard.
Right.
Trying to turn lead into gold.
Right.
Trying to create the homunculus to do all your work for you. Maybe conjure some spirits.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of all thing. That is true. And you just described basically John Dee. He's the guy that I would say John Dee is the alchemist on which the wizard motif has been based.
Cool. When was he operating?
Oh, yeah. He was born sort of just at the Protestant Reformation. So he lived in the wake of its happening.
Gotcha.
So like he's born and like he's a baby and it's going on, right? Mm-hmm. And then as he's growing up, he's like the first generation of Protestant people.
Okay.
Right. And it's not clear that he ever fully agreed with it, but he didn't want to get killed by one side or the other. So he sort of hedged his bets both ways. But alchemy, I would say the whole thing about alchemy, if you could sum it up, it would be the study of transmuting one thing into another thing.
Okay.
Right. And so the turning lead into gold is what people always, they're like, oh yeah, trying to turn lead into gold. But and they assume it was for economic reasons. Mm-hmm. Okay. But that wasn't the point at all.
Really?
No, not even a little bit. I mean, like you had nobles that would give them patronage for this purpose because they wanted this money source, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But the alchemists, it was a purely spiritual exercise because they believed. See, they had the same sort of fractal idea of the universe that I've discussed here before, where as above, so below. And they thought, well, if you could have a process that could turn the most base metal into the most pure, then that same process could turn the most base soul into the most pure soul.
Ooh.
Right? Mm-hmm. And so they thought that you could turn this into a science. You could have like a science of holiness, basically.
Yep.
Now there, I mean, of course, like I said, there were like Mad King Rudolph II or whatever of the Holy Roman Empire. Is it Rudolph or Rupert? I never remember. He used to employ a lot of alchemists for his Wunderkamera, but he was the Holy Roman Empire. And like every Roman Empire, they had a Wunderkamera, which
what is that?
I also have a Wunderkamera. That's German for wonder cabinet.
Oh, okay.
So what they would do is they would, like, if you were a fancy rich guy, noble, you would just keep these cabinets, which were usually, if they got big enough, they'd be like whole rooms, like a parlor room, of just weird oddities. Like Rudolph would collect dwarves and giant people. Like if you were a dwarf, he would like pay you to just live in his Wunder cabinet,
like in it?
Yeah, like a box of oddities.
But a living person would be in there.
Yeah. Like he'd just be like, hey, you're the dwarf. You live in the Wunderkamera. And he'd have like, maybe an elephant tusk, maybe some weird insects from India, maybe some fragments of statues from ancient Greece. Would all be in this Wunderkamera. And then he'd bring in an alchemist to try and make his little magics and put it in the thing. And sometimes if like Edgar Kelly, the alchemist, you would get stuck in one of these and couldn't get out, because you would promise, like Edgar promised King Rudolph that he could do the lead into gold thing. Mm-hmm. And he was never able to pull it off. And so he was sort of trapped in the castle until he could do it,
Yeah.
Like he made all these big promises. And so Rudolph was like, well, okay, you better, I've given you, here's a castle, but now you got to do it. And so then Edgar tried to escape one day and he got out on the roof and he slipped on a roof tile and fell and died.
That's sad.
Yeah. Maybe alchemist's only true martyr. Really.
Fell off a roof.
Yeah, that's
sounds about right.
That's what Terence McKenna used to say about him. He was the only true martyr of alchemy. But so alchemy was this thing. So there was we'll talk about two alchemists, right? And the alchemists are very interesting because in some sense they're what we want to be. Mm-hmm. They're people. They were at the time. They're like pre-Enlightenment, right? Pre the scientific revolution, but only just a little bit, like 1-2 generations.
Okay.
And they've got one foot in like the mystical, spiritual magic world and one foot in the rational science world. Mm-hmm. And they don't see any contradiction.
Okay.
And so in some sense, that's where we want to get to. And they did a lot of good things. Mm-hmm. A lot of good things. A lot of inventions came out of this. one of the guys we're going to talk about, Johannes Trithemius, which is a very strange German name.
Mm-hmm. That
right there makes him a little questionable. But he was a German, and he's known as the father of toxicology. Some have called him the father of chemistry,
Yeah.
And some have also called him the father of modern medicine as far as using drugs to treat illnesses. But also, he would do the practice of scrying crystals.
What is scrying? Whoa.
Scrying is where you try to draw either angels or demons into a crystal.
Wow. Did he ever succeed?
Yes. By his own accounts. But you take that for what you will. But so yeah, so, and he was also, Johannes was also the father of cryptography. He was the first person to, at least in Europe, to have, this very coded messages that he would use. It was originally used to transmit their knowledge around without the uninitiated being able to see it.
Okay.
Right. Mm-hmm. But then John Dee used his magical cryptography to become a spy for Elizabeth I, because he was an alchemist that was very well known in Europe on the continent. He was an Englishman. And he would go to all of the European court to do his magics.
Mm-hmm.
And then he would write back to Elizabeth I, right? Okay. In his secret code, and tell them how many, what their military strength was and all this. And he is actually the man who used it's wild, but his code name was 007.
Oh,
that's where that comes from.
No way.
Yeah, no, John Dee would sign his things. He'd have this numerical code at the bottom that he would work into these other things. He'd be like, they have, in here in Germany, I have seen 1007 black geese or something. I mean, it'd be more sophisticated than that, but he would have some reason to use the phrase 007 in his thing. And that was his code to Elizabeth that was from him.
Oh, neat.
So he was the original 007. Now and he was also the original Gandalf. Very interesting character. So in some degree, we want to be the alchemist, but we also don't want to do all of the. We want to have one foot in the magical realm, one foot in the supernatural, one foot in the rational. But we don't want to fall under the sway of demons, which tended to happen.
Yep.
Right. So it's a fine line. It's a fine line we've got here.
If you're gonna do that, I mean, there's taking a side here, but yeah. My problem with alchemy, I've always been very sympathetic with the comprehensive, rational and spiritual worldview.
Right.
That was seamless to them.
Right.
But the spiritual part of it was just, for most of their history, Platonism wrapped in, sort of Christian vestments.
Yes.
And that's how you get, sorcery and demons and all sorts of, not to mention the peril of your soul. But you got to take that and you say, okay, they were sort of on the right track, but they were also just doomed for the most part.
Yeah. So
especially when later you get guys like Maxwell, the mathematician, who was a devout Christian and also, at an incredible level, figuring out all sorts of mathematics and things about electronics and all that stuff. And I would consider him sort of the archetypal Christian alchemist in a lot of ways.
That's true. I mean, people forget how really occult the concept of magnetic fields were. Because the Maxwell and Faraday came along at a time when the clockwork theory of the universe was going strong. Like everything is just particles bumping into other particles, like billiard balls across the universe.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh no, actually, there's these fields. and they're invisible lines of force.
Yeah.
And
I mean, that would sound
they're
like...
not tangible. They don't really, you can't touch them, nothing. It's like,
yeah,
very strange.
Yeah.
But, so yes, the alchemists, but see, it's such a strange bag because they also had, when they talk about spirituality, they also say a lot of stuff that makes sense. Mm-hmm. But then also there's like this side, they're a totally mixed bag, of what to do. But like, but they would take seriously, like Johannes, whose name I always have trouble pronouncing, Tridesimus, whatever. Anyway, he was a German guy, and he was a Benedictine abbot. Okay. A Benedictine monk. All right. And he took so literally the idea, there's that passage in the Gospel of John that says, Christ is the Logos, the Word from the beginning, in whom all things have their being and in whom all things hold together, right? Yep. He took that so literally. He said, well, then Christ or the Logos must be an actual substance, and I could distill that out of matter into an elixir.
There's your error right there.
Right.
Is you're taking the idea of Christ and depersonalizing it to make it fit into a Platonic sort of view of the supernatural.
Perhaps, but he would have countered, well, then what else does it mean? Right? Like, then how do you explain Christ being in all and in whom all things go together?
I think it's a lot closer to the metaphor of like a relationship and a marriage, not necessarily a metaphor, but an actual relationship. And, you can speak of a married couple in those kind of same terms. If you've got a strong marriage, you're held together by each other. Right. That sort of thing. And if you view that passage, in the context of the rest of Scripture, where a lot of marriage metaphors are used, I think it makes a lot more sense. But I do think the alchemists were just, they'll take a little something out of Scripture, and they'll look at it through the lens of Platonism, and then go off into La La Land, and that's how they ended up, doing the weird, nasty stuff. I mean, one element of the, I don't know, are you going to talk about like putrefaction and the different levels and processes that they...
Maybe.
I mean, they get into some dark stuff. And
they do.
It's like the aesthetic argument we've talked about before. It's if your spiritual stuff is out of whack, your aesthetic sense is going to be out of whack, and you're going to find yourself doing some really disgusting things. In the pursuit of your goals. Right.
Yes. So this idea that you could distill down the Logos into that was the philosopher's stone. Yeah. Because some people thought it would be like a hard substance, like a stone, and some people thought it would be an elixir of life, so it was debated about what form it would take. But they thought that if you had this thing, right, that it would, if you passed lead through it, it would turn lead into gold. And if you passed it through yourself, it would purify you also. So this guy Johannes, he's like sort of, not really, but he's sort of the first super alchemist, And he had a lot of, like I said, he was a Benedictine monk / abbot of a monastery, right? And he was born in 1462, died in 1516. So he's pre-Reformation. He dies at sort of like the end, the year before, because when the Reformation in 1517, I think that's when the theses were nailed on the door. Which I have my own theses that I need to nail on some doors. But anyway, so his father, Johannes, his father dies when he's an infant, and his mother remarries when he's 7. But his stepfather didn't like education. He thought that should be verboten. Just go do your German thing out in the field. But so Johannes had to learn in secret. So he gets the secret stuff from the beginning because his father doesn't want to be educated. But anyway, somehow by age 17, he learned Greek, Latin, and Hebrew on the down low.
Awesome.
Right. Very, very smart fellow. So anyway, he runs away from home, right, to go take up study at Heidelberg. And then when he's 20 years old, he's traveling back home from university to go see his mother. He gets caught in a snowstorm, as you do. He runs into a Benedictine abbey for safety. Who hasn't done this?
Yeah.
And then he decides that he just will stay there. And then they say, "You're so cool, be the abbot." So he becomes the abbot of the monastery at 21, right?
This monastery sounds pretty chill, like, hey, hey, bro.
Well, they're German.
Yeah.
They're German. So I have a feeling, my suspicion is that there were like 50% of German monasteries were very devout people, and 50% were like, they just wanted a place to go drink and not have to work on the farm every day. And, probably some of them were gay.
Yeah.
Because the monastery served as a nice, and the priesthood to some extent, served as a nice reserve for gay people to go to in the time. Like that was, and it still does, frankly.
Yep, it's sad.
That's just, I don't know why. Gay people are more religious. I don't understand why, but it's true.
Well, for a lot of, that time, you had to have an excuse to not be married.
Yeah, you did.
You can't just be a bachelor. That was frowned upon.
So that's what I think, there's like 50% of it. So he probably ended up at one of those 50% of the German monasteries who are just like, whatever. We're not really here for the religious side, but just for the social benefits that we're accruing, right? So anyway, he becomes this abbot, and then he uses this monastery as his base of study. And then he's a very knowledgeable person, theology and all this stuff, but he's also using it as like it's becoming his magical lair.
Yeah.
Right. And we all have a magical lair to some degree. So we can't be hitting on him too hard. Anyway, he's all of his reputation as a magician does not gain him wide acceptance among the populace, right? But anyway, he as I said, this is the thing that's so confounding about them, because they're doing all of these quote unquote irrational practices, and they are doing all these things that are surely at least some degree evil. But I'm not sure how much they're aware that they're doing evil, and how much of it is just accidental. It's very, because all this interesting real stuff comes out of it. Like I said, Johannes is the father of chemistry, the godfather of chemotherapy, they've called him, the father of toxicology. I mean, he does some real work. Cryptography, stenography. Stenography is the practice of concealing a message within another message.
Ooh.
Or a file within a file.
Okay.
Right? So he's done all this interesting stuff, and his works were actually, unfortunately, his works were placed on the papal "you can't read these" list. I forget what that was called.
Are they still there?
No, they were released in the 1910s, maybe.
Okay.
I think the 1910s, World War I, maybe somewhere in there. Anyway, his books were placed in the papal, don't read these or you get condemned sort of thing.
Wow.
But it's called the Index Liborum Prohibitorum.
Okay.
So the index of banned books, prohibited books, from 1609 to 1900, because it was believed to be about using spirits to communicate at long distances, and it may well have been. However, it could also have been a misinterpreted early pass at simple cryptography, because it's not. He definitely uses magical language, but a lot of people that have gone back and studied it are saying he's actually using magical language to hide the fact that he's reversing it. And you would think he's using cryptography to hide his magics, but he's disguising. He may have been disguising an actual government file, like a government method of encoding a message.
Yep.
Under the disguise of being like a crazy magical manual.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that people think it's like, oh, this is some alchemist ravings book. But then it gets back to the German king and it's like, oh, here's the cipher for our secret messages. So it's not clear what he was doing. And that's clear for all of this guy's work. Like he first came to prominence as an author for writing historical accounts.
Mm-hmm.
But it was quickly realized in his own life that he'd fictionalized a lot of it. So he just made up some histories, and people were like calling him out on it. And then he was like, but then you got to ask, well, but he is the father of hiding messages inside other messages.
Mm-hmm.
So what was he doing this for? Right. You can never really be sure. Like, is this some sort of these fictionalized accounts, some code of like, okay, pick out this bit, this isn't true. So look at the first letter of each. Like, what is it? Who knows what he's doing, right? So I don't know. I don't know how to judge the guy.
So let's pull another aside here, and I want to point out yet another in the long line of intersections between espionage and intelligence work and magic and the dark arts.
Right.
There's quite a few characters like that throughout the history of the West.
Aleister Crowley.
Yep.
He was Aleister Crowley, the modern founder of the Wiccan movement. Was also a British spy.
Yeah.
It goes back. The British have always used magicians as their spies. They just always will.
Yep.
It's just how they do. So I'm not sure why. If there's any magicians listening, and I know there are, they should probably tell us. But see, then you can't even trust the messages because it's like, is this a secret file within a file?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So I'll read you some stuff that Johannes wrote. So this is the thing, like he's writing this stuff, and it's like this actually makes some sense. Like this is an interesting idea. So this is Johannes writing about God. All right, God, he says, quote, God is the all-essential and hidden fire in all things. And aside, the hidden fire, Tolkien puts that phrase in the mouth of Gandalf. When he's fighting the Balrog, Gandalf says, I am a servant of the secret fire, which is the Holy Spirit or whatever. Okay. So God is the all. I think probably Tolkien was familiar with Johannes from reading Lord of the Rings. But
sure.
So God is the all essential and hidden fire in all things, especially living things. That fire generates all things. It has generated them and will generate them in the future. And that which is generated is the true divine light through all eternity. God is a fire, but no fire can burn and no light appear within nature without the addition of air to cause the combustion. And likewise, the Holy Spirit in you must act as the divine air or breath or inspiration, lighting the fire of the divine and fanning the fire within your soul so that the light will appear. For the light must be nourished by the fire, and this light is love and gladness and joy within the eternal deity incarnate in Christ. So he had this idea of like God is fire, Holy Spirit, spiritus, air, right? Mm-hmm. Same thing as the combustion element. And then they give rise to light, which is Christ. So it's like all of these physical symbols or metaphors of the divine,
right,
are present in alchemy. And they thought, well, this you can actually carry this physical thing really far, right? Now, this may or may not be in conflict with the Nicene Creed. I was thinking about that. You know, the Nicene Creed, well, the Western one.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Aside. For your listeners that don't know, the whole.
Are we about to break down the filioque here?
The filioque, the filioque is a Latin phrase which means and the Son. That's all it means. Filioque and the Son.
Yep.
Right. And the whole reason the Eastern Orthodox Church is split from the Roman Catholic Church is because of that phrase.
That's not the whole reason. This is the last. It is the whole reason. That's the last reason.
No, it's the whole. I mean, there was the whole Crusaders murdering and raping nuns on the altars in Byzantine.
Yeah.
Sure, I'm sure that had something to do with it.
And icons and statuary.
Yeah, icons and statuary. But But the filioque was like the nail in the coffin.
Okay.
I always liked with Charlemagne. They had this big ecumenical council in Byzantium. They were like, okay, look, we can have images, but not three-dimensional, right? No statues.
Right.
Because that just smacked a little too much of idolatry to them.
Mm-hmm.
Still to this day, Orthodox don't have statues. They just have two-dimensional icons.
Gotcha.
And they had this big council, and it gets to Charlemagne, and he goes, nah, that's silly. They're just some statues.
Yeah.
And then they just keep making the statues, and that's really the whole reason. Charlemagne was like, whatever.
I do what I want. I'm Charlemagne.
Right. So I've wondered if because in the Nicene Creed it says we believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the Giver of life, who proceeds from the Father and the Son.
Right.
In the Roman Catholics. And the Orthodox leave off the and the Son. So I don't know if having the light of Christ as being the light that appears from the fire and the air of God and the Holy Spirit is because that makes it sound like Christ is from the Holy Spirit. I don't know.
That's why it's just an aside within the aside within the aside within the aside.
Yes. Yeah.
This is why the doctrine of the Trinity is so difficult, and why don't try to explain it too far, because you just end up in some horrible error or schism. Yes. It's a mystery, people. 3 and 1, 1 and 3. Just take it for what it is. Don't try to understand or explain it any farther than the Bible does, because when you do that, you're just gonna wreck something.
Yes,
and you're gonna end up, trying to inseminate a sheep's bladder so you can putrefy and create a homunculus, or you're gonna end up massacring millions of nuns or whatever. It's just it goes nowhere good. Just back off.
Does. Yeah, it does. So anyway, he continues. He says, in Christianity, the light is Christ. He who does not, this is an interesting part, and I thought here he agrees exactly with Aquinas. He who does not have the light of consciousness within himself is in the fire without the light and lives in the darkness of hell. So to be in the fire without the light. Mm-hmm. That's because, Aquinas conceptualized eternity, the afterlife, as really everyone going to the same place.
Right.
I think this is a good, but there would be like different, if you're at a party and like you're really bitter and like no one's talking to you and you're upset.
Yeah.
And you're sitting in the corner like, meh. You're having a miserable time, but everyone around you is having a great time.
Yeah.
And that's how he conceived of heaven and hell. Like God, when you die, everyone goes back to God. Mm-hmm. But some people like God and some people hate.
Well, the presence of God to the unregenerate sinner is a horror and destruction, and the presence of God to those in Christ is joy and life.
Right. It's like if you're in a cave, you're in the darkness, and you come out into the sunshine, the sunlight burns your eyes, like it hurts. But the same light and heat is pleasant to other people.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that was how Aquinas and Johannes here is. He says, he who does not have the light will still be in the fire, but he'll be in the darkness. He'll be in the fire without the light, and he lives in the darkness of hellfire. And he goes on, he says, so all things have been made by the power of the divine word, which is the divine spirit or breath that emanates from the divine fountain in the beginning. The breath is the universal spirit, called the spiritus mundi. That means spirit of the universe, spirit of the world. It was the first like air. It was at first like air. Now, where he gets this idea, I don't know. Mm-hmm. It was at first like air, then contracted into a fog or nebular substance, and afterwards became water. This water was first of all spirit and life, because it was permeated by and made alive by the spirit. It was dark in its depths, but through the outspoken word, light became generated therein, and then the darkness was illuminated by the light, and the soul of the world, the anima mundi, had its beginning. This spiritual light, which we call nature or the soul of the world, is a spiritual body, which by means of alchemy can be made tangible and visible. So that's the whole goal of alchemy right there, is that you could take the spirit or soul of the world, the substance of nature itself, and could make it, which is invisible, that you could take the spiritual body and by means of alchemy could make it tangible and visible.
Man, that guy goes from sound doctrine to psychotic gobbledygook in no time flat, man. Wow.
Yeah. But again, this is my problem with it because it's like, yes, I also agree that, but it's clear that this guy was smarter than me.
Yeah, he's a genius, clearly.
Right? So it's the thing. Now, but, I was saying art is sort of art is an alchemical process.
Okay.
Because if you ever make art, what you're doing or what you can do, why this modern art doesn't really do this, which is why it sucks. But what you do is you take your psyche, your mental thoughts, and you put it into a tangible form. Right? So you have your emotions, you have your feelings, and then you put it into like a sculpture or a painting, right? Or a piece of music. And then you can actually work on the piece, and that will change your state about it. So you can art is a way that you can make tangible your psyche and then fix it with your hands.
So is bad art or modern art something that is just kind of gotten out of the psyche state but hasn't really been fully manifested?
Yeah, I think so.
The work hasn't been done. The work hasn't been progressed. Because you could start a beautiful painting starts with some sketchy pencil drawings. My wife paints, so I get to see this process. Sketchy looking pencil drawings, scribble here, erase there. And, if you just slap some paint over that and call it good, you've got, modern crap art.
Right.
Or you could go through the work and the process and the refinement using technique and skill and, 2-point perspective and all these wonderful techniques that have been developed. But all that requires skill and effort, so you got to have both sides of that.
But the thing is, doing that actually fixes your soul. Like going through that process. So it is a way that you can like if you compose a piece of music, you are making tangible your emotions, your psyche. Like you listen to Ode to Joy and you feel exactly what Beethoven felt while he was writing it.
Yeah, yeah.
It is a way of making the invisible tangible. So like this idea is not like crazy offhand. But this whole idea that it being water, that's a bit weird. But
Yeah.
but like if you like Pachelbel's Canon, and I hear his name, Pachelbel's Canon, that's my favorite classical piece. And when you listen to it, it's like you just feel
oh yeah, man.
his suffering and his joy in his suffering. It's just like it's right there. Music is a way of communicating emotion, basically.
Yeah.
And but anyway, so you can make these invisible things tangible. So that idea in itself is not weird, but this idea that it was at first like air, then contracted into a fog or nebular substance, and afterwards became water. That is such a strange statement.
Yeah.
I mean, water is sort of magical in itself. I mean, like, you have this, first of all, it's required for life, right? Like when we go to other planets and we look for life, we say, is there water here? If not, we'll probably just write it off. So it is sort of a magical stuff. It's also the only thing that I know of that the solid form is less dense than the liquid form. Bit weird. That's why ice floats, right? I mean, what other solid things float on the liquid form? You don't really think about it. So then I'll just finish this thing there. This is a universal and living fluid diffused throughout all of nature that pervades all beings. It is the most subtle of all substances, and that's important, and the most powerful the most powerful on account of its inherent qualities, penetrating all bodies and causing manifest forms in which it is active to become alive. So I really think, like you were saying, this flows from, he's talking about substances. This really flows from Aristotelian metaphysics.
Yeah.
Right? Which I think is a problem. Because like the Catholic Church still uses Aristotelian metaphysics to explain its stuff.
Yeah.
And my thing has been for a while, like, guys, Aristotelian metaphysics doesn't work. Like, I'm not saying your doctrines are wrong, but this idea that they can be explained via Aristotelianism,
right,
is not gonna work, because we just know that doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're moving here in MAPS. We're moving towards a new alchemy based on the new science, where we don't impregnate sheep bladders.
That's good. That's good.
Right. And if any of our listeners use this as an excuse to have sex with a sheep corpse,
don't do it.
We disavow.
That's good. That's good to lay that
disavow
out there pretty clearly.
all necrophilic bestiality.
Yeah.
Of any form.
Don't try to create any homunculi.
No. But, you think about it, sort of the quest for AI is sort of an idea for a homunculus, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. That's why I don't like it.
Yeah.
There's so many parallels between modern high tech and alchemy. It's really... People say that chemistry is the continuation of alchemy. That's not true. Chemistry is what happened after materialism thankfully stripped all the weird... And I'm not often thankful for materialism, but alchemy needed to be stripped of its defunct spiritual content. But high tech, the singularity, upload your consciousness, AI, all that stuff, quantum computing, that is total reintroduction of all that same metaphysical content right back into instead of into chemistry, they're doing it into
informatics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I never hear this brung up, but it is sort of weird that like the goal of computer science right now is to basically create life in order to enslave it.
Yeah.
Isn't that a bit like we want to make this super smart intelligence and then have it do all of our work?
Right. Which is exactly what the homunculus was.
Yeah, it's a weird goal.
Yeah.
And that's make me always distrust the computer nerds. I'm like, you're trying to summon a slave life form.
Yeah.
Via your computer magics.
Yep.
Mr. Tweed bow tie or whatever.
And there's a moral and an aesthetic way to identify and reject this, but you have to have the hardware in place, right?
Yes.
Man was created by God to do work.
Yeah.
We're built for it. It's good for us.
Yeah.
That's how we're supposed to function. Anytime you try to pawn off the work of mankind onto something else, either you take part of mankind and call it inferior and make it do all the work, as in various forms of slavery throughout the world that still go on today.
Yeah.
Or you're trying to make the homunculus, or you're trying to make the AI.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime you try to do this, it's a disaster.
Yes.
There's a difference between tools, and my favorite communist, Ivan Illich, can tell you all about this. But there's difference between the use of tools and then separating man from work.
Mm-hmm.
And you can explore that difference from a philosophical standpoint. Illich is good at this. The dude knows what's up in this department. But when you try to do this, dude, it's a form of utopianism, I think.
Right.
And utopian philosophies, you try to eminentize the eschaton, it's always a disaster.
Yes. Don't eminentize the eschaton.
Yeah.
That's our phrase here. But yeah, so that was Johannes, right? And I'll get back to his strengths. But then the other one that comes after him is John Dee. And John Dee, again, he's such a strange figure. He stands as like he's got these huge moral problems, but then he's also got these huge accomplishments, and like this, it's very strange. So John Dee was an alchemist. He was born right as I said during the Protestant Reformation. Okay, so Dee is arguably the man on which every single wizard archetype since has been based. He's arguably the guy who was the inspiration for Gandalf, for Faust, for all of these characters. As I said, he was the inspiration for 007 because he used his code name. Okay, Dee, and he is really the. You can make an argument, and I would say a very strong argument, that he both birthed modern science and also the modern world.
Wow.
Because he's also the first guy to ever use the term and ever bring up the idea of having a British Empire. He was the guy that said, you know what, we need a British Empire, which we all know that was a big thing in history. Yeah. And this is a thing that why I bring this up is because historians always like to play it off like everything is just sort of like political, economical terms, like the British Empire happened because they were looking for gold in the New World and very bland.
Right. Mercantilism and
Mercantilism and trade, right? But that's just because our society is full of, that's all we think about is the GDP.
Yep.
And that's all we can. But actually the British Empire happened because of occult practices.
Ooh.
And that's not even not true. That's so here's the thing. Here's the thing about the British Empire. So I think it was in, when was it? It was sometime in Dee's life. I don't remember the exact date. But there was a new star in the sky, which was visible for 17 years, which we now think was probably a supernova. It was 1572. Okay. There was now a supernova, and so what did they do? Well, most of the populace, as most Christians have done ever since and ever will, whenever there's something like that, they interpret it as a sign of the end times. They go a little crazy. They think it's the eschaton.
Yep.
But Dee, who was a court advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, he says, no, because he was also, of course, an astrologer, so an astronomer. And he says, no, Elizabeth, this is a sign of a new star rising. The Roman Empire, the Papal Empire, is going away, and a new British Empire must be established, a Protestant empire around the globe. And Elizabeth I says, this is the will of God and must be done.
Wow.
That's actually how the British Empire gets started. That's the real reason that this, and to facilitate this, Dee uses his magics and his knowledge to create secret navigational instruments that Sir Francis Drake used in his circumnavigation of the globe. And they were kept, this was like the high technology, like the French couldn't see it, the Germans couldn't see it, right? But the British control of the waves was largely due to the instruments invented by John Dee.
Fantastic.
Because John Dee was a master of geometry and mathematics. And in fact, until World War I, if you were in any British school, private school, and you studied your math, you would study Euclid for your geometry, the founder of the Greek fathers. But before you did that, you would read and study John Dee's Prelude to Euclid.
Whoa.
So for like 400, 500 years, he's a prominent figure in British educational system. And he's the guy that basically, he not only told the king and queen, look, we need to have a British empire, a Protestant empire, but also here's the tools by which you will get around the world to do this. And he believed further that you had to have colonies on the New World because that was probably where King Arthur had come from. And North America was Atlantis itself.
Whoa.
And that is it. I'm not making that. That's why the British colonized North America, was this quasi mythological occult star and sign in the sky stuff. Not mercantilism, not like, economics, carrots and sticks, not the levers. It was some weird mythological stuff by a dude that stared into a crystal ball.
Wow.
And that's the actual history, right? History is permeated by this weird spiritual stuff that just gets glossed over in textbooks. So, Dee, like I said, Dee also introduced the English to the following. He introduced them to the plus sign, the minus sign, the multiplication sign, and the division sign. First person to tell them that, to show them like, hey, here's how you, they did add and stuff beforehand, obviously. The English knew how to add, but he was the first one that introduced these symbols that were widely used elsewhere.
Okay.
For doing that, right? Like I said, he was an English spy, the 007, early advocate of heliocentrism. He also he had early prototypes of the telescope. He made a reasonable guess at the speed of light, which is still pretty reasonable based on our knowledge of it now. How he did that, I don't know. He talked about the fourth dimension, and he theorized the basics of solar power.
Whoa.
Right. So this guy's really thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
Right. And he goes on. He starts in England, but he goes throughout all of the continent, and he basically begins this pre-scientific reformation, which directly leads to the Enlightenment. So in a really not far-fetched way, you can say John Dee birthed the modern world.
Ooh.
Because he's got the British Empire, the all of these technologies, right, are coming out of him, right? And he's also and this is where his Gandalfianness comes in. Like, he's also, in the same time, he's loved by the courts. He's feared by the populace, because he would make these pieces of clockwork. He would make animatronic clockwork animals and stuff for like stage productions and theater. And it would terrify the locals because it was like some robot. And it was like, you can imagine like Gandalf using his wizardry to create firework dragons. It's the same thing, right? That's how he was perceived. And so he's loved and hated. He's feared and also respected. It's a very weird stuff. Now this is where we get into the part of his life that's a little strange. So he has this thing called a show stone. SHEW, show, but they pronounced it show, like a show stone. This is a piece of black, which you can still see. It's in the British Museum today. John Dee show stone. It's a piece of polished black obsidian.
Yeah.
In a mirror. It's an Aztec ritual mirror. It actually is from the Aztec Empire. How John Dee got a hold of this, who knows? But he claimed the angel Gabriel gave it to him in his back garden. Now, and this is the guy that founded the modern world, right? And again, it's this constant theme in history of like angelic / demonic interference and the giving of technology.
Right.
Right. That's the Promethean story.
Yeah.
It's happening over and over again. And so John Dee's claiming that Gabriel came down and gave him this showstone. But John Dee is not a gifted psychic. He tries real hard, but he looks into this showstone. He stares at this black obsidian mirror. He's doing all his candle magic. He's trying to communicate with spirits. Nada. Okay. But then a fellow named Edward Kelly comes into his life. And Edward Kelly has no ears because they've been chopped off. Because that was the traditional punishment in England at the time for someone that was a charlatan and that had swindled people out of money.
Okay.
So a dubious character enters into his life, right? So, and remember, John Dee is the court magician of Elizabeth I, right? Okay. So he's in places of high power, but into his sphere of influence walks this disreputable criminal psychic named Edward Kelly, who has no ears, right? But he can apparently, or he does this to a degree that satisfies John Dee anyway, can see into the showstone and see the spirits and read the future. Ooh. We don't know what he did to convince Dee of this, but he obviously predicted some things that came true often enough that Dee was like, okay, you can do this. So Edward is not a smart man. He's a very average fellow, but he has this gift, right, to make up for his lost ears. And John Dee is the genius behind it. They become this team that are looking into the showstone and sort of seeing the future. Okay. And this gets into they're being very successful. They're predicting a lot of stuff for the king and queen, or for Queen Elizabeth. Everything's going well. They're predicting things for the people on the continent and getting lots of money. But then one day, the spirits in the showstone tell Edward that he needs to sleep with John Dee's wife. Right.
And it was going so good. It was going so good.
I know. It always happens. So anyway, they have to do it. The spirits say they have to do a wife swap. And this causes a lot of problems for Dee. He doesn't want to do this. But he asks them again, and the spirit's like, yeah, this is what needs to happen. So John Dee at this point is he's an older man, and he has a much younger bride. Mm-hmm. Right? And her name is Ann Dee. Not Andy, but Ann, last name Dee.
Gotcha.
And she's, by all accounts, very beautiful. And so this is probably just, Eddie just wanting to roll around in the hay with her.
Yeah.
But so he goes off and has has his time with John Dee's wife, and John Dee does it with his wife. Mm-hmm. They do a wife swap because for some reason, all magic has to eventually involve cuckoldry. I don't understand it.
So I'm talking about.
But it has to happen. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, and then all we read about is in the diary of John Dee, in his spirit diary, he says that Edgar Mitchell brought this up. There was a big kerfuffle about it, and then he says, quote, "And so it was done." So they did this thing. Okay, but then after that, they really get into and John Dee doesn't want to do this, and he uses to console his moral qualms about it. He cites to himself Augustine's quote, "Love, and do what thou will." That's something Augustine said. Mm-hmm. Which, if you'll notice, is very similar to what Aleister Crowley says. Yeah. Do what thou will should be the whole of the law.
Right.
And John Dee is the mediator that gets from Augustine to Aleister Crowley.
Ooh.
Via this, right? Via this wife swap thing. And Aleister Crowley did a lot of sex magic too. But
can we do a brief aside? We do a brief aside here.
Yeah.
LSD, okay? People that were doing LSD, and you talk to the elves or whatever, it always starts off nice, right? They always start out friendly. But you can do it enough, and eventually they tell you to kill yourself or somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true.
Yeah.
That's what always happens. So anyway, Eddie and John, they do this. John consult. So we can really say that it goes Augustine, John Dee, Aleister Crowley, via the medium of cuckoldry.
Was Aristotle a cuck?
No, I'm sorry, Augustine.
Oh, Augustine.
No,
was Augustine
was himself before his conversion quite a licentious man.
Okay.
A lot of people know that about Augustine, but he would he liked his ladies. Anyway, so this goes well. So after this, their spiritualism kicks into high gear. They're getting messages all the time, right? Mm-hmm. So much so that their spirit diaries afterwards contain an entirely new language from scratch with its own unique grammar and syntax that they claimed was revealed to them as the language used by pre-lapsarian man in the Garden of Eden.
Wow.
Right? And who knows? Maybe it was. I don't know. But it's this no one really knows how it's supposed to be pronounced, but it's there in the book.
Okay.
Right? But we don't know the sounds that associate. But anyway, there it is. The Voynich manuscript factors in here too. Do you know the Voynich manuscript?
I thought it was supposed to be a hoax.
Well, no one knows. But the Voynich manuscript, it's some alchemical book that we have that's written in some language no one's ever heard of. It is actually a language. If you analyze it, it has all the things of a language. And it has all these diagrams, these like alchemical diagrams of like plants that don't actually exist. Mm-hmm. But they're like sort of close to things that do exist. It's like a daisy, but weird, or like a retarded hazelnut or something. And it's a very strange. But there's some reason to think that maybe Eddie had this in his possession somehow. The charlatan.
Okay.
Fellow, and that may have been his entry into John Dee because he has this rare book. Mm-hmm. And John Dee had more books than anybody. He had like 2,000 more books than Oxford at the time in his own personal collection.
Wow.
And the reason that we think that they may have had the Voynich manuscript is that it appears in the Mad King Rudolph's library in his Wunderkamera. Mm-hmm. It appears in his Wunderkamera at the same time that Edward and Dee go to his castle. Mm-hmm. And in the records of Rudolph, there's 14,000 gold pieces for a manuscript to an unnamed person. And in John Dee's tax records, there is at the same time a 1,400 gold piece deposit from an unnamed person. So it's circumstantial, but could be. Mm-hmm. This could be where the Voynich manuscript comes in. And there's no evidence that King Rudolph was an alchemist. He just liked weird stuff to put in his cabinet.
Okay.
To go along with his dwarves. His dwarves needed something to read.
Yep.
He brought in the Voynich manuscript and said, figure it out, dwarves. Something like that, right?
Sure.
It's what we all do with our dwarves.
Yeah.
I mean, today we take our dwarves and we make them be Ewoks.
Yeah.
Or little people in Game of Thrones. Uh-huh. But back then you would make them try to decipher alchemical angel languages. Same thing.
Right? Same thing. Yeah. Yeah.
And so they got to, after they get this angelic language, they're like really convinced in themselves now, and they write a letter to King Rudolph, the Holy Roman Emperor at the time, and they say, look, we figured it out. We know how to make the Philosopher's Stone. And Edward really sells this hard, which is why he gets stuck there. But mm-hmm. John sort of hedges his bets a bit and says, maybe. And when it doesn't work out, John's able to leave because he's hedged his bets. But Edward has made all these high promises, so he has to try to escape via the roof and slips on a tile and dies. So, as you do. And that's sort of so John Dee goes back, but by this time Elizabeth dies, and then James takes over, and James hates magicians. And he's very strict fundamentalist, and he's kicking them all out. So John Dee has to end his life sort of giving astrology horoscopes for people on the side for some side cash. He's very upset about it. He feels like his life is a failure, but the angels in his mirror tell him, don't worry, you'll be remembered forever, which is true. We're still talking about him.
Yeah.
So make what you will of John Dee, right? Interesting guy. All of his magic equipment is still available on view in the British Museum. He's got his crystal ball, his little hexagrams, his wax candles, his show stone. They're all there for you to go visit.
To see this.
Yeah, and that stuff is like, you got to remember this. He looked into his crystal ball and a star in the sky and was like, okay, and this is how the British Empire starts. Mm-hmm. Right? It's very So maybe the British Empire was a mistake. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yet another example of the hidden metaphysical roots of big chunks of history or technology or whatever.
Yeah. So my purpose in bringing that up is not only to show the occult side of history, but we need to bring back some of that alchemical spirit in that we do not have this sharp division and divorce between the supernatural and the scientific. And I was thinking, as you were saying, I thought this too, maybe the fault line is this basing it on the Aristotelianism.
Yeah.
And particularly the idea of substance and essence, an accident and all that stuff. Because if you do that, you have to conclude that the base of reality is some sort of like physical substance. Mm-hmm. You almost have to, right? Mm-hmm. And then it would make sense that that would imply that you could control the base physical reality through chemistry, which is what they were trying to do.
Yep.
But here's the thing, and this is where I will get with Catholics and be like, now listen, we got to abandon this substance accidents talk because it doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. Because we've entered the realm of nuclear physics now. Mm-hmm. And we know that elements are actually all the same with different numbers of protons on them.
Yeah.
Right. And it's hard to fit like a substance onto that. Like the substance of lead is this, right? Mm-hmm. You're like, it has a leadness or whatever. And you're like, yeah, but if you just throw in another proton, it becomes a different thing.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, what would be the new philosophy from which you could connect the physical, rational side to the supernatural? And I was staring at my periodic table of elements, which is a real table in epoxy of the actual elements in there. Like I have little flecks of gold, little bits of mercury encased in epoxy. It's very nice.
Cool.
I don't have the radioactive ones, unfortunately, because it's hard to put in epoxy things that only last a few microseconds.
Yeah.
But I have all the ones that are shelf stable, shall we say, in this epoxy. And I was looking at them, thinking about alchemy, as you do. And it occurred to me that maybe the connection we could use to build this new supernatural science union wedding would be number. Because the only thing that makes, our listeners are smart, they know this, but the elements like hydrogen and helium and oxygen and stuff, they're all the same kind of atom, just with different numbers on them. So like hydrogen is just one, like it has Z number 1, atomic number 1. It has 1 proton. If you have a thing with 2 protons, it becomes helium, right? If you have a thing with, 8 for oxygen? If you have 8 protons, then you're oxygen, right? So it really is this, and every time you add 1, you get a new element, right? And so you have this sort of integer real number based system of reality. Like you're just adding 1 each time. Like you go hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium. Is that the next one? Barium, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, right? And you just go up the line. Every time you're just adding 1 proton on. And so it's like this arithmetic version of reality.
Kind of geometric too, because if you're visualizing this, as like a monad and then a dyad and then a triangle and then a square and then,
Yes. Or as John Dee wrote in his book, the Hermetical Monad, where he talked about this idea.
I think as far as just understanding fundamental metaphysics, I don't think that the Hermeticists and the alchemists were totally whack. Right. But they were enough whack to end up doing the crazy stuff that they did,
Well, so here's where the number theory as the basis of reality is sort of it, because that's what the quantum in quantum mechanics is.
Yeah.
Like quantum is quanta, meaning at the subatomic level, you get discrete integer elements. So like you can have 1 electron or 2 electrons or 3, but you can't get a half.
Okay.
Right? You can't get a half electron. You can't get 0.2 of an electron. You can't get 0.2 protons. Right? They always come in whole integer numbers, like 1, 2, 3, 4, not like 1.4, not 1.372. You can't have pi electrons. You can't have pi protons. You always get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You just count.
Okay.
Right? That's where the quantum comes in. But here's the thing. There is, and this isn't highly speculative, but it's highly weird. There appears to be, this hasn't been proven, but there appears to be a direct 1-to-1 correlation between the most fundamental quantum system of like how you're able to count these particles and prime numbers. So prime numbers are sort of the atoms of numbers, right? Because this is a thing. You can make any number can be written as a multiplication of primes, right? So like 9 is 3 times 3. 100 is 2 squared times 5 squared. So 2 times 2 times 5 times 5.
Gotcha.
Because 2 is the only even prime, right? So and there's also an infinite amount of primes, right? Which is, you can prove that to yourself if you want to go through the proof, but there are prime numbers that are a bazillion digits long.
Okay.
It's crazy to think about, but there are. And so there's just this mouthfeel connection. It sort of smells the same. You've got these prime numbers that are like these atoms of numbers, and then you've got this quantum system that only allows like integers. Like it also counts arithmetically, and that's how you have elements, right? And so anyway, there was this German fellow, again with the Germans, named Riemann in the 1800s. And he just played with mathematics. He was a pure mathematician, not for any particular reason, right? He just didn't. And he had this sum called the Riemann zeta function. It's just named after him. He just called it a zeta function. It's pretty pretentious to call your function after yourself. Just FYI, when you start, let other people name it after you later. Okay. But like, if you're like, here's Smokestack's zeta function, people are like, I don't know if it's worthy of you having your. But so anyway, he just calls it a zeta function. And this is going to get a little weird for a second, but just follow along with me. So imagine you have the zeta function is just 1 over 1 to the s power plus 1 over 2 to the s power plus 1 over 3 to the s power plus 1 over 4 to the s power plus 1 over 5 to the s power on to infinity, right? Makes sense? So like, let's say s is 2, so it'd be 1 over 1 squared plus 1 over 2 squared plus 1 over 3 squared plus 1 over 4 squared, and so on, right? Which converges to some number, because that'd be 1 plus a 4th plus a 9th plus a 16th plus, so that would converge to some number. And in fact, they all converge to some number except for s equals 1. That's where that's where it's ill-defined. That's your singularity in this function, right? Because that just goes off to infinity, because that's 1 over 1 plus a half plus a third plus a. Okay, so I know that's a little hard to visualize. It's just a sum of numbers in your head. It's 1 over 1 to the s plus 1 over 2 to the s plus 1 over 3 to the s. Okay. So Riemann was playing with this, and you say, well, why would you do this? This is weird. But he noticed some interesting things out of his function. Like if you did, let's say you did s equals 2, well, that sum converges to pi squared over 6. And so he was like, that's strange. What does this sum have to do with a circle? Right? Because pi is obviously, related to the circumference of circles. And so he's like, well, that's a bit weird. And you find all these other constants appearing out of this sum. Like when you start adding all these that relate to geometry. So you've got this arithmetic sum that is pulling geometry out of itself. Okay. Now, what he realized is that there are zeros. There are places where this sum goes to 0, right? If you plug in different values of s, like on the this thing will tend towards 0 if you start using, say, negative values of s and whatnot. Okay. And he hypothesized, it's a bit too technical to explain in words, but that there was this one position on his function where there would be this infinite amount of this sum coming to 0. Like there are the infinite number of s's that you can plug in that will give 0 from this sum. And he figured out, or he hypothesized, he said, I can give numerous examples here, but I can't prove it rigorously, that all of the places where this function gave 0 was that pattern of where it gives 0 is an exact pattern of where the prime numbers appear in the number table. Which is very strange. Like, where is this coming out? Like he's sort of stumbled upon perhaps a map of where the prime numbers are. Like an arithmetic map of where the prime numbers exist. Okay? And this is if you prove this, if you can rigorously prove this, or find a counterexample where it is not true, you win $1 million, by the way. It's one of the Millennium Prizes in mathematics.
Okay.
I think there are 7 left where there's $1 million prize for solving these problems. Because now here's where it gets interesting. Physicists in 1999, I don't remember their names. Let me see. Michael Berry and Jonathan Keaton. They discovered, or they had strong evidence for it, it's not exactly proven yet, that the most fundamental particle quantum system also falls upon these zeros of Riemann sums, like their eigenvalues. So so what I'm getting at here is there's a direct, almost one-to-one connection between prime numbers and how quantum mechanics, like where their values fall.
Ooh.
Right? And so then you think, well, could that be? It's hard to say, but it's like, could that be where this sort of, because you're getting into this mystical realm here now, sort of. You're like, right. You got prime numbers, and then prime numbers give rise to all the elements.
Right.
That's basically what this is saying. Because the way that the particles fall together, they fall together at the same value, in the same pattern as the prime numbers appear in the number table.
So, okay, let me stop here and let me try to poke at this a little bit. And you'll have to be patient with my innumeracy.
Right.
So are prime numbers sort of arbitrary based on the numbers, the base system you're using? So are prime numbers different in base 12 or base 6 numbering?
Well, they would appear as being written differently, but there would be a mapping between them.
Okay, so the map still works in different
different number schemes. Yeah.
Okay.
Like you could also do this in, say, binary, right?
Okay.
0, 1, 0, 2.
Sure.
It'd just be a little more complicated, but you could.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just wonder, like, so is this, and there's also this not only does it have the prime numbers in there, but it also has these geometrical. So then you're starting to get into the realm of like sacred geometry, right? And which, all classical architecture is built on the principles of sacred geometry, which is why it looks so beautiful.
Yeah.
So I don't. So like, then what are we saying? Like, then could we go so far as to say, the alchemists would say that Christ was a substance. Could we say that Christ is like, is the prime numbers? Like, I know that's not true, but you get what I'm trying to sort of like, somehow this must fit into the logos which holds all things together. Like, what are we talking about when we say that? Is it geometry? Is it the basic rationality of 1 + 1 = 2? Like, is it not sufficient that he authored it? Well, yeah, except he says that he is it. Like the word was with God, but also was God. Right? And so you're trying to get into this, like, what does this mean for the universe to hold together by this logos? And if you drill down and down and down, you see that, like, wait a minute, elements are connected to prime numbers, and that's really weird. Right. And then you say, well, okay, what are the prime numbers? And it's like, well, that's sort of like the atoms of what numbers are. And then, so I don't know. I can't quite connect it farther than that. Are you looking for the physical, metaphysical junction of the world and the logos, deity hanging it all together? Yes, that's where I'm trying to figure out, like, where are those things making contact, and how do they make contact? Yes. Okay. Because they must make contact somewhere. Right. So then you say, well, where is this juncture happening?
And we ourselves, as we discussed before, are a model of this. Like there has to be a means of contact between our mind, our psyche, and our physical body. Like there has to be a metaphysical, physical contact point somewhere in our brain or something.
Yeah, we've discussed it. And you know, the thing about it is this idea, this magical language keeps creeping back. You can't push it out for too long.
Yeah.
Like in nuclear physics, there's this, you know, like basically atoms will hold together if they have the right number of protons and neutrons. Because there's an atomic force, which is, or there's a nuclear force rather, which is sort of pushing everything apart. Mm-hmm. Right. And then there's there's sort of balance, like the nucleus is there's some forces holding it together and some forces pushing it apart. And when you throw on too many protons or too many neutrons, like two protons together will repel each other because likes attract. Likes repel, right? They're both positive charges. Mm-hmm. If you take two positive poles of a magnet and you put them together, they push apart. So the neutrons, using the nuclear force, act as a glue to hold them together. So you can have one proton by itself with one electron, and that's a hydrogen atom. But then if you want to have helium, you throw two protons together, but they won't stick together by themselves. They need two neutrons to attach to them too, to sort of hold them together like glue. Mm-hmm. Right? And so there are these numbers, like, so you can have one and then you can have four, right? Well, the two protons require four nucleons, being two protons, two neutrons together to hold together the atom, right? Mm-hmm. And then you go up from there, and lithium, you have to add more neutrons on. But at some point, if you add too many neutrons, so if you have a helium atom, traditionally you have two protons, two neutrons. But you could you can make heavy helium and add three neutrons. As long as it has the same number of protons, it's the same element, mm-hmm. right? But at some point, if you throw on too many, it breaks apart. And that's what causes radioactivity, because it becomes unstable. And so these atoms become unstable because they have the wrong number of protons or neutrons on them. And so they're sort of quasi-stable for a minute, or maybe for 30 years or something like that. Like cesium-137 has a half-life of what? Close to 30 years, right? That means that it will decay at a rate. A half-life means that if you have say X amount, then in the half-life you'll have X over 2 amount. Mm-hmm. So in 30 years it will decay. Half of it will have decayed away to something else. So they start breaking apart, and that's what radioactivity is, because you get these unstable atoms. But here's the thing. We have our periodic table, right? And it goes off to the edge, and all the ones at the bottom are radioactive. But it's theorized, and it makes sense, that if you go farther on the table than we're able to do, and you add the right numbers again together, you can make elements at a higher, like with way many protons that we haven't synthesized yet, that would be stable, shelf stable again. So you have shelf stable, radioactive, and then if you keep adding more, you can get shelf stable again.
Is that you're trying to get to the next prime number?
Yeah.
And well, no,
these are thought to occur at what are called in nuclear physics magic numbers. They're literally called magic numbers.
Okay, yeah.
Right? So some of the magic numbers are 2, 8, 20, 28, 50, 82, 126, etc. And they go on. And these are like, at these numbers, it's particularly, for some reason, stable. Mm-hmm. Right? And so it's possible that you can make these heavier elements again. And there's magic numbers and there's doubly magic numbers, right? And so this magical language is creeping back into our science again. Mm-hmm. And like you said, we're trying to recreate the homunculus with the AI. And it's very strange because, the kicker is that the alchemical dream was achieved. We can now turn lead into gold. It's prohibitively expensive.
Yeah.
But in a nuclear reactor or a particle accelerator or cyclotron, it happens all the time. Like it did come true. And maybe on the verge of AI, we're getting close to making the homunculus come true. I don't know. Mm-hmm. So it's all it's like, this isn't.
Man, how much more proof do you need that high science and physics and technology and computer sciences is the direct continuation of alchemy? I mean,
it's all the same. It's all the same. And you have to we have to divorce it from the demonic.
Yeah.
Like, computer science is fine, but let us not create tiny homunculus slaves.
That's the thing is you have to have a metaphysical reality. It exists whether or not you want it to or believe in it. It's like the idea of God. God's going to exist whether or not you believe in him or like him.
Right.
And the same thing with, you've got to have some sort of a metaphysical view. I think that's what really gets me excited about this show every week, is that you got to fill that gap with something. Yeah. You got to fill that gap with something. And I'm tired of it getting filled with New Age, crystal magic, Crowleyanism, alchemy, whatever.
Right.
Crap. I'm tired of it getting filled with crap.
Right. You want to inseminate sheep bladders again.
No, I do not. It's a disgusting lie from hell.
But I know. So there is this. Like, the modern world was birthed by a guy looking into a crystal ball. And right now we are still engaged in this magical pursuit. Like, we did it. We made lead turn into gold. Mm-hmm. Now all that remains is we have to make the homunculus, the AI, and then achieve the elixir of life and have immortality through anti-aging. And then the alchemical dream will have been completed.
Yeah.
But if you can do the one, and it looks increasingly like we might be able to do the second. Mm-hmm. Like, make the AI actually happen.
Yeah, I think we already have, really. I mean, these black box algorithms, that they're using for that, it's pretty close, I think.
Maybe there's the Chinese room argument, against AI, which I find somewhat compelling.
Which is,
well, I don't want to say it without saying the guy's name, because I like to give him. Who did this? It was John Searle, smart guy. He first did this in his paper Minds, Brains, and Programs, published in Behavioral and Brain Sciences in 1980. Mm-hmm. And so this has been sort of like, this is like the main thorn in the side of AI people, because he said, look, okay, he called it the Chinese room. He said, imagine you have a guy. Said, even imagine me. I'm in a room and I have a really thick book, right? And you write me a letter in Chinese under the door. Okay. And I get it. And I can't read Chinese, but I can look up these symbols in this book. And this book tells me, it has a mapping of, like, given these symbols, write these other symbols on the paper in response. Mm-hmm. And then send it under the door. And you could have a whole conversation like that, right? Mm-hmm. You could write things and you could go in, and I wouldn't understand what it says, but I flip through the book and it tells me if these symbols appear in this order, then right now, maybe in practice, it may be a prohibitively large book, mm-hmm. right? But at least in theory, it could work. And then you could slide it back under there. He says, but does that mean that, but I don't understand Chinese. Just because I have this book, this cipher that tells me to give coherent responses to messages that come in under the door in Chinese, doesn't mean that I understand Chinese.
Yeah.
And so then he said, well, isn't that just basically what a computer's doing? Is it actually intelligent? Is there actually understanding there? Or is it just this big cipher of, like, responses to given inputs? Mm-hmm. And to which people have said, well, then that's just what we do anyway. And to which he goes, no, because you actually understand it, because you can make logical leaps from it to other things.
Yep.
And then people have argued, well, maybe the system understands Chinese. Like, you don't understand Chinese, but the book does, and you're just the operator of it. And there's these counter arguments to that and stuff. I do find the Chinese room argument against the even theoretical possibility of a true AI somewhat compelling. Right. However, I'm not completely sold on it.
Well, the homunculus was never meant to be a fully functional human.
Well, that's true. It
was a subhuman little thing that just did your work without complaining.
That's true. And in that regard, then we've succeeded.
Yeah.
But but the general AI people want to create, like, a super intelligence.
Well, they're trying to create God.
Yes. Which, again, is an alchemical dream. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if is this just a problem with Western Europeans? Maybe you don't see the Chinese like, we must create God from the ether and draw him up into the computer. You know, they don't seem to want to do that much.
So we're going back to the Protestant work ethic here. All this energy needs something to focus on that's useful, right? Yeah. We need a mission. Otherwise, we're just making homunculi. You know, we're doing stupid stuff. We're creating Facebook. Okay,
I feel that so hard. That's why my political party is simply the Space Elevator Party. But then I ask myself, is that just rebuilding the Tower of Babel? Probably.
It probably is. I don't think space. I don't see a moral argument for us being in space.
But see, I just want to build the thing.
Yeah, I know.
I
know. It's because you've got that's why this is. So I often tell people I just need somebody to throw hand grenades at me for the rest of my life. I don't know where I stole that from. I didn't make that up. Yeah. But that's what Westerns need. We need somebody throwing hand grenades at us for the rest of our life. Because otherwise we've got all this creative power with nothing to focus it on.
This is why we have to reestablish this sort of supernatural link to the physical. Because we need something good to do with all this science and not just make Facebook and Twitter and like weird stuff.
And we need the tools to be able to see and understand the aesthetic and moral value or defect of the things that we are putting our hands to. And if we have a purely physical, materialistic worldview, we've set all those tools down, and we don't understand how evil social media is.
Yes, it's horrible.
We don't understand how evil the hydrogen bomb is.
Right.
We don't understand how evil it is to make super fake viruses and accidentally unleash them upon the world. Okay?
Yeah.
We don't understand it because we've set down the tools needed to understand it.
Getting back to the supernatural of the atomic bomb, the first thing that Robert Oppenheimer did when he exploded his bomb is quote the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
The Hindu scriptures. He said, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
Yep.
And he was influenced to make there's a whole thing on the occult history of the atomic bomb, but Oppenheimer, as his inspiration for it, was heavily immersed in the Upanishads.
Yeah.
Like just heavily, like all of his theories were coming out of like Shiva and Vishnu stuff. It's crazy. You read his diaries and stuff, and it's like, well, this is wild.
We really do need to do an episode on the bomb project and all those characters. That would be awesome. But I feel like we're reaching the end of our episode here, Sumo.
I agree.
I feel like we're winding it down. Do you have any parting words? Any advice for our listeners that are out there living in the world of modern plague?
I sure do. You know what? Here's the thing. They're lying to you about the masks. Masks are super helpful.
Yeah.
You have to be an idiot to be memed into the idea that masks aren't useful. Like, what is this? Even doctors. I've seen doctors be like, masks. I'm like, well, then why are they all wearing them?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like all these people, like these doctors at conferences are like, masks don't help you. And then they have a mask on their face. I'm like, okay, of course having a barrier over your nose and mouth helps. It's not perfect, but of course it will help you.
Well, the Chinese won't export any masks to us. And so we haven't adopted mask use over here because there's not enough masks to do so with.
Well, listen, I got a stockpile of masks.
Good.
From even before this, because you just need. Look, when you're out in the Badlands at 3 a.m. looking for Mothman, you need a mask.
Yeah, yeah.
No,
I'm not going mask. Out. I'm not going out in public again. I made my final trips out yesterday. I'm not going out in public again until mask wearing becomes normal.
Yeah, and
it's a jungle out there.
Even if it doesn't get bad, even if that's it. Just cut off from the world.
Yeah. Let's just all become Bane for a while.
Yes.
Okay.
Everyone become Bane. sit in your house with your sheep bladder.
Yep.
And your homunculi. Ugh. Martial law.
Martial law. Be careful out there, everybody. Don't touch stuff.
Yeah, don't touch your face.
Don't touch your face.
Don't touch your face.
Don't lick strangers.
No.
Stay away from crowds. That is rule number 1, people. Stay away from crowds.
Social distancing.
Amazing.